In order to achieve this, we'll have to keep track of the games that are still going and check periodically if they are expired or not, and in such case they should get updated to a game cancelled so nobody can play the game anymore. So the way to do this is we'll have to add new stored field that is going to be, in our case, an active games queue that we're going to check every block. So this stores the game expiration and the game ID as key. What this is going to be is just an index comprises of the game expiration height and the game ID. So when we reach a certain height, we can pick up only the game IDs that belong to the expiration at that height. So this is going to be called active games queue, and it's going to be a collections key index key set, and it's going to be a pair collections pair of two uint 64, that the first is going to be the expiration height and the second one is going to be the game number or index. And then we'll have to add here the initialization of the active games queue. That's going to be a collections new key set, and we have to pass here the schema builder, and then we will need to add a new key for the store that we're going to call it active games queue key with a different prefix than the other, obviously. Format this, and we should add here our keys, active games, and then the name for this human readable active game queue, and then define the per key codec. That's going to be a uint 64 key, a key composed of two uint 64 key. And then where we're going to check which are the games that expire and update them accordingly, it's going to be in a method that's called endBlocker. Remember that we had in this app.yaml where we set the order of different begin blockers, end blockers. We're going to define an end blocker for our custom module. So to do this, first we go to our module, end blocker. We'll have to, similarly to the has genesis, and here a module has end blocker, that module. Actually, this is from app module has end blocker, and this would signal that this module has an end block with a context and error. And then down here we can add the end block, and we just call a keeper function that we have to define that's called end blocker, and that will run on every block. When it ends, it will run this logic. We were going to add an abci.go file where we are going to add here all the ABCI related methods In this case, we're just going to add a end blocker. It's going to take a context, return an error, and then usually in these end blockers or any other similar like ABCI function like begin blocker, there's a telemetry that it's used to measure the time spent in this during this execution, because this will execute on every block, so it's important to make sure that this is not delaying so long the production of blocks. So always make sure that whenever you add a end blocker or begin blocker, is some logic that is not very heavy, because this can really slow down your chain. So we can add here telemetry, metric, begin blocker. We have the corresponding. Can I choose start time? Oh, this is module version. Module. And now we define, we're going to fetch the active games whose expiration period have ended, which means that this will be equal or less than the current block. So we're going to define a range that we are going to iterate through our active games queue. Depending on this range, it's going to be a new prefix unit pair range until pair range, and this is our key. That's a uint 64, and we want the range until the current block height, context block height. For this we'll need to unwrap the context to be an SDK context. SDK unwrapped SDK context, and this SDK comes from the SDK types. We're going to call this import SDK. And now we can get the block height from the Cosmos SDK context block height, and this is going to be our range to get the active games queues that we want. So will give us the IDs of the active games that will be expired. So this is going to be the key collections pair to uint64, set to value key, and this it's going to return either a boolean and an error. And this what function is going to have game. We're going to get the games that we stored the game index in the second key. So the K2 is the second key of our key pair that we are defining here. This first key is the expiration height, and the second one is the game index. So if there's an error, we will return false and the error, and then we're going to check the status of the game. Check that status is in progress or waiting. and then update the game status to cancelled. So this is because we don't want to change status to cancel if there's like a game that already finished with a winner. So we just want to change it whenever it's in progress. Game status equals rules status waiting and status rules status in progress. Then we update the game status to be status cancelled, and let's update the game with the keeper games game set context game number and the game updated game. If there's an error, will return false in the error. Keeper games get. There you go. And then if this already happened, we have to remove the game from the queue to avoid iterating over it in the next block, because we already updated it. So we have to do k active games queue, remove the specific key. Now this case is the game expiration height and the game number. If there's any errors, we're going to return false at the error, and then just return false nil. And if all these has an error different than nil, we'll return the error. Otherwise, return nil. So here's our logic. That seems alright. We'll check if in the queue which one has expired, and we'll update it to the status cancelled and then remove it from the queue. We also have to add the corresponding logic in the genesis. This means that, for example, if we started a genesis with some games, we have to make sure that if there's any game that hasn't ended yet, then we should include it in the active games queue. Set context, collections, join the game expiration height and the game number. And now if this error is different than nil, we'll return the error once. And also we should do the same thing on game creation. So we have to set it. Let's copy this. So when we create a game, we should add it to the queue. So here in create game, we set it into the state, and then we should add it here, the new game number and the expiration height. We're getting some errors. Okay, nothing new here. And the collections imports. This is nil and and also where we have to remove it from the queue whenever the game has ended. So when we reveal a move and the game has ended, then we have to remove it. So before emitting the event, we'll do the corresponding removal from keeper active games queue, remove context, and we are going to remove the key that corresponds to game, it's called game, yeah, game expiration and game number. If there's an error here, we'll return nil and error. Return nil, error. So we have now a logic implemented for the expiration. We can check it out if it's working as expected. For now, the default TTL, as we saw, was 20 blocks, but we can actually query that from the params. So let's try it out. So let's install the binary again with the latest changes. Make sure everything's working fine. And we'll initialize the chain again from scratch. And now we can start the chain. There's some issues here. Let's see. Oh yes, we're missing. We defined the end blocker in our module, we had to set it what's the order in our app.yaml. So in end blockers, after the staking one, we are going to run the RPS blocker. We can test it out, but let's define the default params to be a little bit smaller so we don't have to wait. So let's say that default TTL now is 5 blocks. So let's install to pick up these latest changes and initialize a new chain, make init, start, and then let's create again RPSD. Let's get some address, Bob's address, RPSD transaction, RPS create a game against Bob from Alice with 3 rounds. If I can type from Alice. Yes, we're going to sign a broadcast. Query that the game was created. Is the status waiting. Expiration 14. We are on 12, 13. And let's check now. After 14, this should have been cancelled, and it's cancelled. It's working as expected, so we can continue.